As the sun rose on the 5th day, I found myself wielding a brand new beard. I have no idea how it grew right in the middle of the night, but, you know, it was there. I guess 5 days of not shaving have caught up to me, even though this is definitely more than I could ever potentially grow in 5 days. Oh well. I began collecting supplies because I was running low on basically everything, now that I had spent it all on making my alchemy engine. However, that was no problem, as supplies were all around me. I began picking up grass and flint for the first part, figuring that I could probably use those for fires and creating other things. I then headed into the forest, knowing that I'd probably have to chop some trees as well. So I took out my axe and began to chop away, doing my usual 15 chop method on the first tree that I attacked of the day, and it always works. Don't know how that always works, but nature has been just full of surprises today, hasn't it? I took out my second axe and began to take out another tree, seeing as I probably need a lot of logs in the near future. Picked them all up and then grabbed out my shovel and began to dig, grabbing the extra logs from the tree as well as clearing the landscape of any stumps. I left the pine cones there though, because I had no use for pine cones right now. Collected another piece of grass, but then I got the idea of digging up the sapling. Figuring if I could do that, I could probably replant it closer to home, and that way I'd have a supply of sticks way closer to me that probably wouldn't require any sort of care at all. So I figured it would make my life a lot more convenient, and I began to work on it, digging up as many saplings as I could find in the nearby area to later bring back to my base. As I walked through the forest, I began to contemplate what I needed to do. Food supplies were definitely running short. My grass and my sticks were now intact. Logs were doing okay, but food was definitely running low. So I figured I would probably have to be looking into that as well, and probably my new beard as well. That needed to have some thought, and it's now ready. That didn't bother me as much as growing a beard overnight. Now, I knew that I definitely was not manly enough to be capable of growing a beard like this normally. So I began to wonder if I was in the normal world or not. And as soon as a tree died right in front of me, I began to confirm that I probably was not. I decided that later on I'd probably shave my new beard. I figured even though it's manly and probably great for impressing the ladies, I have really no interest in pursuing manly prowess, and there are no ladies here anyways. So the day began to get on, and I headed home, figuring now I could probably plant and then maybe work on the farm a bit to get more food for the night. I headed up northward on the path, and then quickly found my base. I checked my rabbit traps first, seeing as there was a rabbit bouncing around inside. I could eat him later. And then I went down to plant my sticks. Planted them all down in a nice line of 8 little stick sapling thingies. Figured it was a bit orderly, looked nice, and it would work. I headed into my base and walked to the fire pit, putting a nice log on the fire, figuring I had to eat something. I murdered the rabbit and cooked it up again. It tasted good, and it would probably tide me over, at least until later today. I went over to my farm to check on my plants, and found that with the rain, it was basically growing right in front of my very eyes, which was interesting, yet at the same time kind of creepy. I figured I should probably gather some more manure now, even though I really didn't want to. So I went north to visit Colonel's camp. I gathered a couple pieces of manure, but didn't really go too far into it, seeing as I didn't want to be grabbing up another dozen of these things. However, I still definitely needed them. So I walked past all the gazing, creepy stares of the beefaloes, and made my way through their camp gathering the manure. I then picked up another piece of grass, just mostly to wipe off my hands. At this point I headed south, remembering that I had a rabbit trap around here, and I was considering checking it. I looked around for it, and I saw it over there in the distance, so I decided to gather it, and then reset the trap. I now had another rabbit to make some food with, which made me happy. Night was falling, and I headed straight back to my camp. I saw that my farm was almost done with whatever it was growing, and I'd probably have more food soon. I heard a strange popping in the distance, and I presumed that it came from my farm. I went over to check after eating some more burnt berries, and adding another log to the fire, to find that I had grown a pumpkin. Kind of surprised me how I managed to grow a full pumpkin in a matter of days. However, my hunger kind of stopped my thinking early, and I immediately harvested it, replanted the farm, and then picked up some more seeds. I then ran back to camp, figuring I could cook up the pumpkin and then just eat the whole thing tonight. I cooked up the pumpkin and then shoved it all down my throat. It felt good. However, I missed a couple seeds there, so that kind of disappointed me, but I was okay with that, figuring I had enough for now. I went over to my alchemy machine and looked to see what I could create right now. I was kind of considering food. I figured I could make some sort of device that would kind of help me cook, but for that I'd need charcoal. So I made a torch and planned that tomorrow I was going to burn down a forest. I had to decide where, though, because I didn't want to make too devastating of a forest fire, but at the same time I kind of did. I also considered the tallbird nests, their whole camp, thinking I could probably burn that down as well. However, it was mostly surrounded by rocks, so I decided against it. However, I did figure out that I'd probably head north tomorrow to be able to work in burning down the trees, seeing as I'd probably need a decent amount of charcoal. Also, I made work inventing a razor so that I could shave. I shaved off my beard and found that the hair fell neatly on the floor. I picked it up, figuring I could probably use it later on. I mean, I found a use for everything so far. I scared away a crow that was in my farm and then head back to camp because it was running low on fuel. I was also kind of running low on logs, which wasn't a good thing either. The crows were all hanging out in my camp again, which was kind of ticking me off. I stared at the crow for a while and it just kind of bounced around happily as another one landed in camp. They'd probably all be scared away by the time night fell anyways, but I didn't like them anyway. They were creepy and they just made too much noise. I was hungry again. However, I didn't have very much food to spare, so I occupied my time making a rope. That made me kind of happy. I began to realize I could also make some sort of sleeping rope for the night. However, I didn't feel like sleeping tonight, despite the fact that I haven't slept in 5 days. I could also make a whole variety of things, yet there are still so many things that I could not quite attempt yet. I figured I could possibly make a hat out of all this grass, but I feel like it would take up way too much straw, dealing with all the weaving and probably screwing up way too many times. So, I figured it didn't bother. However, I did craft a spear though. Being in the violent kind of mood I was, being ready to burn down a forest tomorrow, I began to realize that I'd probably need some defenses as well. So the spear would do me well. Although, in all honesty, it was just a stick with a piece of flint tied to it with the rope. However, that didn't matter. Tomorrow, I was going to be a man, even though I didn't have the beard. Which made me realize I probably should have kept the beard. I mean, it would have grown great for what I was about to do. I studied my map trying to find the perfect location for my burning. I didn't really find one, though. I also realized my inventory was kind of getting full, so I decided to leave the razor at camp, figuring I didn't really need it for at least another 5 days, right? I mean, I figured if my beard grew once every 5 days, I figured I could handle shaving like that, although not having shaving things kind of sucked. I ran out of my camp before light even arose because I like to live dangerously like that. I headed up the short path to the north, and then straight off of it so I could chop down another tree. Took another 15 swings at this tree, and it fell in no time flat, which was good because I had a lot of work that I needed to get done today. I then began to head up. I had a little bit of life left on this axe, I could tell. I was kind of getting the hang of this now. However, I'd probably need that to cut down burnt trees to gather charcoal, because, I mean, I figured it would help. I headed north and found a tallbird, and it found me as well. I gathered a piece of rock and then ran for it. I found a path and then immediately just ran away, knowing that one day I would not have to run away from tallbirds, but no, they would run away from me. There would be a day, however, today is not one of those days. I gathered a couple more rocks on my way up, figuring I could always use the rocks for something. And I probably wanted to build some structure around my base, and I'd probably need stone for crafting things anyways. Found a swampy area with a frog kind of jumping around a pond. Made me think that maybe one day I could go fishing for food. That'd be good, right? But for now, it was burning time. I set fire to my first tree, and then took out my dapper cane and just kind of walked around watching it like a sir. Began to burn more trees, figuring I was going to need at least 10. I'd be careful with the fire though, it's kind of starting to singe me. I was really glad I had shaved my beard. That would be a serious fire hazard. The trees had burnt and I began chopping them down, slowly collecting my first few bits of charcoal. This was the start of a beautiful thing. I probably wouldn't have to do this very often though, figuring what else would I need charcoal for at this point. I now had 5 pieces of charcoal, but I wasn't done yet. I began to feel a bit of guilt for the forest and decided maybe later I'd probably do a replanting effort. However, that had to wait as I wasn't done burning yet. Set fire to more trees and it accidentally spread to a piece of grass. I felt kind of bad about that piece of grass seeing as I had no quarrels with it. Oh well, I didn't have quarrels with the trees either, so I guess that wasn't a problem. Before the fire even stopped, I started my replanting effort. I also finished my replanting effort. I then attacked the rest of the burnt down trees, collecting the rest of the charcoal that I'd need. There's some ash down there, however I didn't think about collecting it right away. And eventually the frog got to it, and I figured maybe he wanted it, so I'd let him have it. I then gathered a few more rocks before I realized that I was actually really, really hungry. Figured I'd head just a little bit more north, and then I'd head home. I found a strange looking wooden base. It had a box thing in the middle as well as a gnome. I screwed the box thing and went straight for the gnome, figuring he'd probably need rescuing from those evil blocks. I figured maybe he would be my companion or something. I wondered what I would name him. I mean, he was a gnome, so it would probably be something with a G, because that's what people stereotypically name gnomes, right? I don't know. I'm not a gnome expert, I'm just a starving scientist right now. So I headed back home, considering all the different names that I could probably give him. Gerald, Harold, Steve, Bob, Wilson Jr. I ate some seeds, and it didn't really help me think. And instead it kind of helped me run into the river, thinking that somehow I'd be able to cross it, but no. So, me and my nameless friend headed home, back to the base, where I would seriously need some food. I began to run seriously low on, and was wondering whether or not I would make it back to camp alive. However, I was getting close enough, and I ate a carrot to tide myself over just long enough that I could get everything set up, hopefully. Headed back to base and saw that my trap had another rabbit, so I picked that up immediately and reset the trap. Figuring that now I would definitely have plenty of food for nomming on when I got back. Went back to my alchemy engine and got the inspiration ready. However, I needed some more cut stone if I was to do this. I crafted my first piece, a second piece, followed by a third piece because that's how you count. And then I had my crock pot ready. I set it up right above my fire pit and then opened it up. I murdered that rabbit right away and shoved it right into the crock pot, as well as a carrot and that creepy green mushroom I found, figuring it would probably be safer to eat if I combined it with stuff. I saw that my farm was almost done cooking something, so I figured maybe I could just wait for that just a few more minutes and maybe it would be done, but no. I gathered another rabbit as well, figuring worst comes to worst I could use that. However, I probably wanted to use the vegetable as it would probably be easy to regrow. So I used a piece of manure, at first mixing up with a rock, and finished growing an eggplant. Took the eggplant back with me to camp, opened up the crock pot, and shoved it in there and immediately got it cooking. The charcoal heated up all good and nice, and it was good. Started a fire as well, and cooked up the other rabbit and ate that, figuring that maybe the food wouldn't be done in time, and I didn't want to take any risks here. Just watching a crockpot cook food while I was slowly going starving. I looked at my gnome and came to the conclusion that it's a religious artifact, so I figured I would start worshipping it. Placed it down in a place of honor and just kind of stared at it for a while, figuring that that's how people worship gnomes, right? I got all up nice and close to it and prayed for food, figuring that what else would I want from the gnome god. And sure enough, gnome god brought me food. I got a stuffed eggplant filled with rabbit, carrot, and green mushroom. I ate it, and it filled me up pretty nicely. However, I kind of wish it had done more. And now crows were infesting my base, and I scared them away in the name of the gnome god. Figured now I would probably just name him Gnome God. And I would keep the birds away from him, keep him protected, and maybe he'd provide me with food. I headed to the east again, figuring I could probably see some things over there, and I found a couple seeds covered in bird saliva, and I also saw the beef lows, and a couple pieces of manure that I decided to pick up since I had used some of it on the farm earlier. could probably use a lot of this manure on the farm to just grow vegetables very, very quickly. Faster than natural, because we're not exactly in a natural area. So I tried it out, putting 2 pieces of fertilizer down, and boom, instant carrot. Basically, I had just spontaneously generated carrot, which kind of goes against a couple laws of science that I'd studied, but I wasn't too worried about it now because it meant I had food. I also built up another farm and planted some more seeds, figuring I could get twice the food production with the same amount of effort. Night fell and began to realize that I was short on supplies again. I needed more sticks. I wasn't sure how long it would take the saplings to regrow sticks, so I figured I'd probably have to do more exploring. Also, there were a couple other things I needed. I probably wanted to get a nice chest for the house so I could store my items and I wouldn't have to put them on the floor. I also probably needed some armor to defend myself and Gnome God in the base. I also probably wanted to set up some form of defenses, seeing as I had none at the moment. I also probably wanted to do more exploring, figuring there was plenty more I could see around here. So, as the fire ended on this day, I spent the time overlooking what I had possibly doing in the next few days. The day ended in me in more thoughts and no beard.